We continue to follow the breaking news out of Louisville, Kentucky, where people are gathering in the streets as we speak. This, of course, is after a grand jury handed down its decision of one of three officers involved in the deadly police shooting of Briana Taylor is indicted. Former Detective Brett Hankinson, he was charged with 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree. But none of these charges, and no one is charged with anything directly related to Briana Taylor's death. Can I just get your reaction, Ariva, to what we've learned in the past 2 hours?
Yeah, Kate, I wish I could say I was surprised, but unfortunately, having been here so many times before, speaking with you, speaking to other, anchors about these police shootings, I'm not at all surprised.
It absolutely is. And what we're looking at right now, look, people started gathering on the streets even before the grand jury's decision came down. They started walking. Our Shimon Pokipez has been among some of the protesters who were walking very peacefully as we saw through the streets. And this just changed very quickly as protesters came upon police. I think I've counted, and that man looks like he's bleeding. I think I've seen 3 people on the ground, taken down on the ground by police. It is not clear what transpired that led to this, but things have escalated very quickly as police clearly wanting to get this under control. And in these moments, I sit and I watch myself. I mean, look, you now have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 people sitting on the ground who have with their hands tethered behind their backs, waiting to see what happens next. The police are reacting pretty quickly. Go ahead, Charles.
It's painfully ironic, right, that a large part of what is driving this conversation is a feeling of mistrust and inaction or misaction by law enforcement. And what we are actually about to witness right now, and I'm predicting it, unfortunately, is the probable display of that on camera in front of America to see, with respect to these protesters and police and law enforcement's response. So we're already having a conversation about law enforcement and improper and excessive use of force. And what we are unfortunately witnessing now is the furtherance and the support with evidence right before our very eyes of exactly what we're complaining about to begin with.
But Charles, also, I mean, what would you say to the people who are on the streets of Louisville right now? How do you lower the temperature in this moment of real despair and real grief and pain that we can see?
Kate, I understand that question, and it is a logical and a reasonable question, but quite frankly, the most logical and reasonable answer that I have for you is that should have been a concern of Daniel Cameron, of everyone else who was involved with this case, Thomas Wine, the officers who entered that apartment. We all want to have the conversation about how do we quell the violence on the back end. But the reality is, even though this is where we are, this is not the first time that this has happened. This is not, some spontaneous reaction to something that occurred that we just have never seen before. This is the result of a countless list of names. I've had the conversation on this network a number of times regarding name after name after name of humans turned into hashtags. This is a black woman who was in her home sleeping, doing nothing. So while I can understand the need to call for peace, and while I do not want to see anyone hurt, while I don't want to see any violence take place, and I do not advocate for it, I think that it is unfair and unjust to have the conversation about how do we quell protests now, or the violence now, or the reaction, when in fact the conversation was, and always has been, why are we continuously finding ourselves in these positions?
No, I 100% hear exactly where you're coming from. I'm just now looking at this and thinking it's 3:58 in the afternoon. Curfew is supposed to be setting in tonight. They said it's going to be put in place in the county from 9 to 6:30 in the morning for 7. And this curfew is going to go on for 72 hours.
Right.
And this is what's happening in broad daylight. I'm really scared what's going to happen this evening, Charles.
I think that to be honest with you, there is a need for concern. I think that there is a need for concern, not just in Louisville, not just in Kentucky, but across the country. Unfortunately, we saw, Kate, a significant amount of momentum that was built during the spring and summer months around the unrest in America with its racial reckoning and its conversation about race and systemic oppression. And we saw that build. And in the past few weeks, with the exception of Briana Taylor's case and Jacob Blake's case, we've seen some of that die down. It is very likely that this could be the powder keg that sort of ignites that all over again. And, you know, I am hopeful that perhaps it can bring the momentum back in a way that's constructive, in a way that's meaningful. But of course, you have to be mindful that there are forces at play when you're talking about sheer emotion, sheer anger that could lead to this type of destruction. And so, of course, nobody wants to see that. But again, this should serve as a reminder to the rest of the country that, hey, this conversation is...
Do that typically before they're even assigned to you. So if you can recover the round, if it's in any fair condition, you can get ballistics off of it. But you're right. I just have to say something, Jake. Walking back, beginning with the raid, this was so wrong from beginning to end. And this is one of the reasons why Chief Andy Mills in Santa Cruz has put forth policy that no-knock warrant is going to be approved in his department without his review and signature on it. And that's the kind of reform that we need to see. Judges need to be looking at these warrants very closely. But then again, the foundation of these botched raids that we're seeing all across this country, a little less than 50,000 a year, is the failed war on drugs that we're not properly dealing with in this country. The militarization of our police, whether it's a raid or whether it's what we're seeing now with protests, it's all because of this failed, unaddressed, faulty piece of public policy, the war on drugs.
And Laura, the Attorney General is starting up a task force to review the process for securing. Breaking news right now in Louisville, Kentucky, a heated scene between protesters and law enforcement off and on. In the last few minutes, we have seen protesters taken into custody by police, demonstrators reacting to today's grand jury and Kentucky Attorney General decision in the Briana Taylor case. Only one officer was charged, and that was for wanton endangerment, not for manslaughter or murder, as Briana Taylor's family wanted. CNN's Shimon Brokibez is on the ground in Louisville. And Shimon, update us on what's unfolding there. We're looking at some older images from a few minutes ago that show some violence, but have things calmed down a little?
Yeah, they've calmed down significantly, Jake. As you can see, there are just officers standing behind me in full riot gear. They've pushed us further off the corner. We were down in the middle of the block, and now they've pushed most of us over to this area. And things are much quieter, certainly, than they were just a few minutes ago. If you can see, I don't know if you can see, we were blocked by this car here, but police were making several arrests. They were trying to load several of the people, the protesters that they arrested, into a van there. And now it's just, people have just been standing around. Police were able to move most of the protesters away. Some went up some of the side streets here, Jake, but we still don't know why police decided to move in on the protesters here. They had been marching, and we've been reporting, following them along for well over an hour. We don't know why police decided to block off the area here and to prevent them from walking and marching further. And that is when the confrontation ensued. Police moved in, made several arrests. Some of the protesters were throwing water bottles at the officers, and then some of the officers were firing